Hi there YouTube, it's Pyxcore. The words arc and aid really make something interesting. Aid arc. Oh, and also the word arcade, which is what we're talking about today.
Yes, today we are talking about arcades, but before we can do that, we have to talk about where video games really started.
New York?
Well, yes, but actually no. So in 1958 at Brookhaven Public Library in Upton, New York, this guy named William A. Higginbotham would develop something that would change history.
Digital ping pong.
Would you stop interrupting me? Me? Anyway, so old Will here was a physicist and he developed the first ever video game, Tennis for Two.
Yeah, Tennis for Two might not seem like a very big accomplishment by today's standards, but it was back then and still is. Why? Because it was the first video game ever.
While Tennis for Two isn't great, it was the first game ever, and I think that's enough reason for it to be commended.
But that's enough about Tennis for Two. Let's talk about the first ever arcade game.
You know it. You've heard of it. You're probably indifferent to it, to be honest. It's
Computer Space from 1971. You thought I was going to say Pong, didn't you? Because, I put a silhouette of the Pong cabinet and basically just made it seem like I was about to say Pong. Look, Computer Space was the first ever arcade game, and it has a pretty odd cabinet design. Like, I'm just going to put it on screen because I cannot describe this thing.
The game itself was nothing special. Really, the only thing that makes it unique was that dang cabinet design and the fact that it was the first arcade game. The gameplay was similar to Asteroids, released in 1979. The difference?
Computer Space is a lot worse than Asteroids.
Yeah, being the first ever arcade game, it was bound to not be good, but the second arcade game was a lot better.
Digital ping pong again.
It's Pong. You know, Pong, the same dang game as Tennis for Two. That Pong, the game that everyone says was the first arcade game, when in reality it was Computer Space. That Pong.
Oh, thanks for telling me. I thought it was another Pong.
Pong, released on November 29th, 1972, was the second ever arcade game and the debut game of Atari. The game also required 2 players, because come on, why would the second ever arcade game have a CPU player? Now you might be saying, I don't have friends, I can't play Pong. And to that I say sorry, but I also say just use both control knobs. I've done it. It's great.
Great, now that we've talked about the games that were needed to talk about, we can talk about the games that I want to talk about because this is my video, dang it!
First off, we're talking about Space Invaders. While Computer Space may have been the first space arcade game, Space Invaders, released in July of 1978, was the game that brought in the sort of Galaga style. Basically, in the game, aliens shoot at you, and in order to survive it, you have to hide under these fragile barriers. And in order to get past each stage, you have to shoot at the aliens. And I don't know if there's anything after that. Why?
Because I haven't gotten past the first stage. You probably didn't need my explanation or for me to talk about it, though. So why did I talk about it? For kicks and giggles. Anyway, on to the next game.
Pac-Man was released on May 22nd, 1980. It was originally called Puck-Man, but was changed because Toru Iwatani created Pac-Man because, and I quote, "When I started drafting up this project in the late 1970s, the arcades were filled with violent video games about killing aliens. So he created Pac-Man because video games back then were too violent."
I wonder how he feels about Mario Odyssey.
Now you may be wondering why Pac-Man, both the game and the character, was designed the way it was. And it's great that you're wondering that because that's what I'm about to talk about. Iwatani wanted to make a game about food. According to him, he grabbed a slice of pizza, and the rest of the pizza was Pac-Man.
Anyway, Pac-Man doesn't have a true ending. Billy Mitchell cheated to beat it. On to the next game.
Donkey Kong was released on July 9th, 1981, and wasn't Nintendo's debut game, but it may as well have been.
Now, Donkey Kong isn't a sequel to Nintendo's first game, so I don't have to talk about it. But I'm going to.
So Nintendo was founded in 1889, and no, they did not develop games back then. They were originally a card company, then a toy company, and they made a love hotel at one point.
Yep.
They had already developed a few games, but hadn't published them. No, their first published arcade game was called Radar Scope in 1979. In Japan, Radar Scope was successful, due to it being released a year after Space Invaders, as there was a bit of a space arcade game craze going on. In the US, however, it was late getting over here, and so it missed the window where space games were really successful, and thus Radar Scope flopped.
So, Nintendo was kind of at a loss. They had thousands of unused arcade cabinets, but they didn't want to throw them away, because that would just be a waste of resources. But little did anyone know they had an ace up their sleeve. A landlord. Oh, and Shigeru Miyamoto.
In 1977, Nintendo hired Shigeru Miyamoto as he had a degree in industrial art and design, and his father was a friend of Hiroshi Yamauchi, the president of Nintendo at the time. And Miyamoto had developed something that would change the platformer genre forever: Donkey Kong. This game featured a little guy called Mario, whose name was inspired by Nintendo's landlord, Mario Segali, although he wouldn't get this name until the next arcade game, Mario Bros. In Donkey Kong, he was called... Okay, look, I don't know if it's Mr. Video or Jumpman, and at this point I'm too afraid to ask. We'll just call him Mario. So in this game, Mario would jump over barrels and other obstacles to save his girlfriend, Lady, or Pauline, or I don't know, and at this point I don't really care, from a gorilla named Donkey Kong.
This game was so popular they made gorillas into a real animal.
Donkey Kong was revolutionary and basically invented the platformer genre as we know it today. I would only recommend playing the original Donkey Kong in the arcade. Emulators and even console versions just have odd physics and aren't fun to play. Now, the 1994 Game Boy version, from what I've heard, is pretty good, although I haven't tried it out yet. Now, this would not be the last arcade game that Nintendo would make. They also made Mario Bros. In 1983, and they, along with other companies, would port some of their console games over to the arcades. But that's a topic for another video.
Well, after our brief detour from talking about the space shooter genre, let's get back and talk about Galaga.
Released in September of 1981, this game was a sequel to Galaxian from 1979. These games are both basically just better versions of Space Invaders, just without barriers. I'd much rather play Galaga though, because I can actually get past the first levels.
Okay, well, now that we're done talking about that game, let's jump ahead a few years in time to October 8th, 1992. When a little game called Mortal Kombat was released.
Now this would have been just another fighting game if it hadn't been for all that pixelated blood and gore. This game would be one of the reasons used to have a video game rating system put in place, but that's a topic better suited for a future episode in the series. Obviously this was just an overview of classic arcade games, and modern ones are a lot different, sometimes even being ports of mobile games, but that's not what this video is about.
Well, I'm sick of talking about arcade games, so if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna get back to playing Pong. Oh crap, I accidentally bought the other Pong.